Welcome everybody. It's great to have you in March for our MTPD. I know this is a very busy time of the year for everyone, so we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. We are very excited to have this month's speaker, Keisha Leonard. Keisha Leonard is a Teach North Texas master teacher and alumni. She has a master's in curriculum and instruction in math education, and she co-chairs the USEA Equity and Racial Justice Professional Development Opportunities Committee, as well as the pre-conference committee. She is passionate about learning and improving how we educate students, teachers, and leaders. You ask Lakeisha what is the best part about teaching? She will smile brightly, as she does, and say being a stair step for others. She attributes this to being a cheerleader in her youth and having a very supportive family unit. And we are now going to benefit from Lakeisha sharing how we can do all of this with conceptual algebra. And so, Lakeisha, whenever you're ready, feel free to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hey, everybody. Welcome. So yes, this session is about my conceptual algebra course. And so I've titled it Conceptual Algebra with a Side of Algebra. So some areas that I'm going to touch on. So I'm going to do a quick background on myself. Elizabeth gave a lot of great information about me. There are some small tidbits that I want to add in there to kind of help you frame your thinking for how I was able to redesign this course. I'll tell you what my presentation goal is, and then I'm going to go over what conceptual algebra is as a course, just in case you don't know or your program doesn't have it. I'll talk about my starting place, and surprise, surprise, I redesigned it. There's a project. That's the main thing here. And I'll briefly touch on the new curriculum that I put together, and then I'll share some final thoughts. Okay, let's jump right in. So like Elizabeth said, I am a graduate of Teach North Texas. This is my 4th year as a master teacher. And one of the fun facts about me is I actually took the first conceptual algebra course of my program. So I have a lot of experience with that on both sides of the table. I am a former high school Algebra 1 geometry and Algebra 2 teacher. I taught in Dallas ISD. That is ISD, for those that don't have those, is Independent School District. And I also taught in another district called Carrollton Farmers Branch. And I was actually at a U Teach school. So for those that don't know what U Teach is, it is a wonderful network of schools who actually teach through project-based instruction. So every class, or most of their classes, whether it is a core subject or an elective, is project-based. And so it's a wonderful organization and a wonderful network that I've been able to be a part of. As a master teacher, I have taught, or I currently teach, the combination class for step 1 and step 2, and then also conceptual algebra. So I do have a field course that helps influence what happens in my conceptual algebra course. Okay, so as far as my presentation goal goes, I am ultimately here to spark a conversation because I'm not going to be able to get through everything. There are so many things that I've done to this course over the past about 3.5 years that I'm not able to describe in this short amount of time. So I want to spark a conversation so that we can talk about how we can better center conceptual teaching and learning, how we can better fill gaps in student understanding, and then ultimately promote student voice. And like I said, there's just so much for me to talk about. So this is just a spark, hopefully, to a wildfire. And if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. I'll try to keep track of them. I have certain points in time where I'll be able to take a question or two. Okay, so what is conceptual algebra? So I'm going to go through a brief overview of the course description. I'm going to show you where this course is placed in my program's catalog for math. And then I'm going to share the strong foundation that I've already been able to build upon. So overall, the course has been designed to provide content knowledge that engages students in mathematical thinking, promotes inquiry-based learning, and emphasizes hands-on learning and technology. That has always been the case for the course, and I still have that in the course. So one of the things in the course, I need to click. My apologies. Okay. One of the things in the course that definitely has to be discussed is what conceptual means. And so the simplest way that we describe it is it's understanding the why. So that's kind of our working definition of what conceptual is. And through all of the versions of this course, that has been very evident for students. Okay, just a heads up, conceptual algebra was once conceptual algebra and geometry. We eventually decided to break them into two. But either way, the topics in those two content areas were covered in the actual course. So now I only work with algebra, but back in the day, we kind of mixed the two together. Okay. So where is this in my program's catalog? So an ideal track for a math pre-service teacher would be they would take step 1 and step 2, okay? And if they are one of the fast track, then they will be in the combination course. And right after someone takes step 1, they have the ability to take functions and modeling, okay? And so then after that, they have access to taking knowing and learning, classroom interactions, project-based instruction, and once they take PBI, they can also take advanced study of secondary mathematics curriculum course. Okay, so that's what we have so far. And then of course, apprentice teaching comes right after PBI. So as far as where conceptual algebra fits in all of this, it's kind of in the middle. It's very much in the middle. So they have their introduction, and then they're really building upon their content knowledge with their degree plan, and that influences how they prepare their 5E lessons. So, so yeah, most of my students have already taken knowing and learning, and are either in a field course or they're in that semester gap where they're about to take the next field course. So either way, no one goes a really long time without lesson planning, meaning they can't apply the knowledge that they've gained from this course. Okay. Alrighty, so as far as the strong foundation that I mentioned, this course has really good bones just from the beginning, and it's just carried through the years. So this right here is a personal artifact from 2011 when I was in the course. And if you look right in here, you'll be able to see that multiple representations was something that was emphasized in the course, multiple methods of solving, and even this little literacy piece right here where we're writing out what our process was. So those were things that were emphasized in the course that still remain till this day. So every version of this course had math activities and resources. So very hands-on, very mind-on, always providing opportunities for students to explore new strategies and tools, opportunities for students to put on their student hat. So a lot of demos. And then also, now that I'm a teacher, when I look back, I realized that this was my first opportunity to have professional development. It's very comparable to it. When I graduated and actually started going to professional developments, I was like, this feels very familiar. And it was because I had taken a course that was very hands-on. Okay. Also, a lot of readings, videos, and articles. So one of the consistent texts that I saw over the years is this one right here. So elementary and middle school mathematics, teaching developmentally. There is a chapter in that textbook that talks about exploring what it means to know and do math. And so in all of the versions of this course, that was kind of a launching point before they really got into the actual concepts. And then, of course, discussions, small group, whole group, and actually quite a bit of writing reflection. Okay. All right, so I'm going to pause really quick and take time to answer one or two questions. So feel free to throw it in the chat and I'll just answer what I can about what I've said so far before I jump into the rest.
Keisha, can you go back to the slide where you talked about the progression of courses?
Yes.
Okay, and you've mentioned conceptual algebra lives in that arena. How is it rolled out, or when do a student decides, oh, I'm gonna engage in this work?
So most of the time it's taken concurrently with field courses because it's a non-field course.
Right.
And most of them sign up after knowing and learning. I have had one apprentice teacher. I've had one. Don't know how she did it, but we made it work. But usually they're in this range. Okay, awesome. Does it count as a math credit in curriculum or an education course? So this course is actually a program course. So it is a Teach North Texas. It's defined under Teach North Texas, and it's one of our requirements for our math track. So with that said, there's a little bit of freedom. It's not a math course, and it's not an education course. It's like that halfway point. It's that marriage. Awesome. Thank y'all. Very good question. Okay. So my starting place. So I want to share where I started for my redesign. So I had to ask myself this question when I was assigned to teach this course, like, how can I increase this course's impact? And then there were some gaps that I observed just naturally being a newbie. You just pay attention. And then my then and current instructional model is project-based instruction. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So as far as answering this question or coming up with this question, I'm the type of person that likes to add my own bit of flavor to whatever I do. It just makes things flow a little bit better for me. So one of my gifts is that I always enhance whatever my hands touch. So striving for excellence and effectiveness are really my thing. So when I asked myself, how can I increase this course's impact? I realized that I realized I needed to figure out three things. So the first thing is identifying the current impact of the course. Okay, you got to know where you're at in order to know where you want to go. So when I looked at my experience and then what I saw of other students' experiences, I noticed that it was a great stepping stone and a great support for lesson planning. There were a lot of students that I came across that spoke of their experiences or the resources that they had gleaned from the course. So already has a natural impact. People don't say, yeah, I took that course and didn't have anything. It didn't mean anything. There are students that are actually remembering the things they did in that class. So from there, I evaluated the purpose of the course and I asked myself, does it need to change? So in layman's terms, I asked myself, ultimately, why do they need to take this class other than the catalog says they need to? Okay, so really quick, I want to be kind of engaging with y'all. I want to give y'all about maybe 30 seconds to throw in the chat an answer to this question based off of what you know, or if you have this type of course in your program. Why do students need to take this type of class? Okay, to explore the underpinnings of algebra? Yes. Ooh, because most of the math courses they take are procedural. Yes, yes. You need to understand algebra before you can teach it. Algebra, yes, is a high needs course. Yes, and learning algebra in this means it is different from their own K-12 learning. Yes, yes. Good. I like what I'm hearing. I like what I'm hearing. When I thought about why they needed to take this course, all of those things came to my mind. And then also, ooh, you need to learn the results and how you teach in many cases. Yes. Also, trying to phrase my words. Their future students' learning experiences are really important. So yes, they need to have a firm understanding of algebra conceptually, but also they need to be able to extend it and pass it on to their students. And so the purpose of this course is like, yes, like I need to understand it for myself. However, I need to extend it beyond myself. So it's not about me anymore, even though I can still gain things from this course. Okay. And then one of the last things that I did in order to figure out how I can increase the course's impact was try to find at least one gap to fill and try to get started. So I asked a colleague, if you have any thought partners in your program, talk to them, observe as much as possible. So I was fortunate enough to ask the PBI instructor who I work closely with. One day I was talking to her and I just said like, hey, like what do your students need? Your future PBI students, how can they be more prepared when they get to you? Because we had noticed that when they got to PBI, we were still talking about what each E meant. So I'm like, what can I do? I have this course. It's not math. It's not education. It's like this nice middle ground. What can I do? And from there, I just paid attention to other things and made a list and then ran with it for this course. So as far as my observed gaps, I noticed, and this is also personal to me, I noticed that there was this myth of I have to teach 5E bell to bell when I become a teacher. And many students, before they even graduate the program, abandon the model. Like, yes, I'll do it because y'all told me I have to, but when I get my own classroom, I'm not doing it. So there are those that abandon, and then there are those that when they go out there and they start teaching, they actually don't believe they're teaching how they've been taught. And I was one of those. One of the other things is a lack of intentional planning with their lesson planning. I noticed that they didn't fully grasp the meaning or the significance of each of the E's. There was also a lack of wisdom in choosing and using high yield instructional strategies. And also I saw a lack of forethought when it came to lesson planning. They didn't consider student metacognition as they were planning. It was like, oh, I'm planning. This is what I do. This is what I do. Boom. This is the lesson. The third thing that I noticed is there was a lack of understanding between the difference between procedural and conceptual when it came to teaching. So they could recognize that they themselves as students were learning procedurally and conceptually, but they couldn't tell the difference when they had to plan a lesson, whether they were providing a procedural experience or a conceptual experience. Okay. And then the fourth thing, there's this checklist mindset, and maybe that's survival mode of college students, but they think, oh, it's engaging, check. It's hands-on, check. And it might be student-centered, check. That must be conceptual. And that's not true. And then also, there's this, I will call it a mindset. It's a temporary mindset for many, that I'm a teacher, not a facilitator of learning. So what I noticed was many of them struggled with lesson planning and actually implementing the plan. So they were more focused on, our pre-service teachers tend to be more focused on what they're doing as teachers or what they're telling students to do, rather than taking those steps back and venturing into the student perspective of like, how is my instruction or the activities I've put together, how is that being received? And then how is the learning actually happening based off of what I've actually planned? So through my course, I really wanted my students to see themselves as facilitators rather than teachers that just impart knowledge. So this leads me to my bread and butter, project-based instruction. And so that's the last starting place that I had for my redesign. So right before I was a master teacher, I was in the world of project-based learning. It's something that I did for 3 years, and it's heavily ingrained in me, and it makes the most sense to me as a teacher. So I have a quick overview of project-based instruction, just in case you need a nice list. It's here for you. Feel free to grab. But these are the components of project-based instruction that I'm familiar with and I try to use readily. So having some type of entry event, entry document, driving questions, pacing calendar, even doing knows and need to knows. Also having some type of culminating product. Usually there's a product, but if we're talking about a semester-long project, which is what I did, it's a culminating product. And then having some type of presentation, and the kicker here is with an authentic audience. That's what I always fell short with when I was in the classroom, but I figured it out for this course. Having student choice and voice, of course, doing workshops, which are just lessons, allowing students to get feedback and give feedback. So there's a protocol that I gleaned from New Tech, which is the Critical Friends model. Wonderful protocol. I also did some mandatory instructor consultations with their project materials. And then I did an individual assessment of knowledge and thinking, which for some, that's just an essay. And the easiest way to do this with project-based instruction is to have students answer your driving question. Okay, so that's my bread and butter. That's kind of what I operate out of. So from this starting place, I created and embedded a project that filled those gaps that I mentioned. And it also centers student learning and understanding, not my students. So this is where that divide from, this is a math class, we kind of drive away from that. They're still going to learn some things mathematically, but the focus isn't on them, it's about their students. So why? Why have I done this? And I really thought about it. And so me as a teacher, I believe that because how we plan and we implement our lessons, it has a great impact on how our students learn conceptually. And hopefully you've seen that in your students' lesson plans throughout the span of your program. So really quick, I'm going to talk about the project. So I'll share this entire course. It spans the entire course. So all about 15 weeks, 15, 16 weeks is the project. I'll talk about the driving question. I'll share what products I had my students producing, and then I will show you what our presentation, our showcase with our authentic audience was. So as far as the driving question, I started this in 2019, fall 2019 was my first time teaching the course. And so this was my driving question. How can I create student-centered, conceptual, and engaging 5E lesson components that can be used in my future classroom? So that kind of worked out for a little bit. I will explain what I mean by lesson components on the next slide. And so as far as the gap that I'm seeing, I'm a teacher, not a facilitator. I'm a teacher, not a facilitator. When I wrote this in the span of those years, looking back, I realized that it was very teacher-centered. And then the pandemic hit. Okay. Then the pandemic hit, and I switched things up. And so I changed it so that they are creating these 5E lesson components to empower all students. Okay. And I used a diversity wheel. If you Google search YMCA diversity wheel, it's a really great tool. So I used it as an icebreaker for my class, and then a way for us to talk about equity and diversity and inclusion, but then to also for them to see the different identities of students, that they're more than just what you see on their external. And so that kind of helped open up a conversation, because there are a lot of students now, or pre-service teachers now, that are really interested in inclusion. So having this as a driving question has been great. They are finding strategies to make things more accessible for students, and they're putting it in their lessons. So the driving question does matter. So as far as what I have my students produce, so I have them throughout the semester in their designated times, they create 2 ready-to-teach 5E lesson components. And by lesson components, I just split the E's up. Okay. And what I've told my students, in order to address that, I have to teach 5E bell to bell. You can still do 5E out of order. The model itself, the approach itself works really well. But if you can't do 5E, you can still do an explore. You can still do a very student-centered explain. You can still do an engage before you do notes. So it's not that the 5E model has been disbanded. You can mix those things up. So for this, I have them choose 2 of these areas. And so in my program, we actually split the explain into 2, because we noticed after students would explore, then the teacher would tell them what they should have discovered. The teacher just starts talking. So we decided to split it into 2 so that there's an opportunity for students to share their ideas with other students, for the teacher to hear what students thought without interjecting, without trying to change their minds. And it's a great time for formative assessment, and it's a great time for our students to practice questioning, equitable questioning as well. So that's where the explain 1 and explain 2 kind of split. So they choose between making an engage, making an explore with an explain 1, or making an explain 2. And with each of these, there's an area of emphasis that goes with one of the course units. Okay. So also with this, they need to produce proof of intentional planning. And that really is in the template that I use for them to put their lesson component ideas on there. So vertical alignment, it's great that you know how to teach this topic, but do you know where it fits in the grand scheme? There's always students that especially when they're like in like step 2 or in CI, where their teacher hands them like, okay, you're gonna be doing this. And they're like, okay. And they go full college on students, full college. And it's like, but did you ask your teacher where this fits in there? That's because they have no concept of the vertical alignment. They don't know what they've already learned or where they're going. And then also scope and sequence. They don't know how it fits in a curriculum, in the grand scheme of it all. So we talk about that in my class. The rationale for time length. It's a simple, very simple concept, but students were like, oh yeah, it's gonna be 30 minutes. Okay, to do what? Why are they spending 30 minutes? There are some that are like, oh yeah, I have a great explore and it's going to take 45 minutes. That's the entire class period. What does your scope and sequence say? How many days do you get to actually teach this? Oh, you only get 1.5. Okay, well, there are other topics. I need you to go back and edit. They need to show proof that they thought about the limitations. There are many great ideas, but you need to think about the practicality in your actual class. So what do your resources look like? What does technology look like? What if it's very engaging and student-centered, but you have a very quiet group of students? Or maybe you have students that don't like to engage with each other. What are the limits of your implementation of the lesson? And what are some solutions? Also, we talk about misconceptions and accommodations. And those really like how to address, like, what are you expecting? And then, of course, accommodations is, how can you make this experience better for somebody else? And then they also produced a culminating product, which was a presentation. It could be PowerPoint, it could be a slideshow, it could be a video, whatever, but it showcases their learning and their product ideas at the end of the semester. So they're creating 2 products, which are, I call them lesson components, but really they're just activities of one of the E's. And then a culminating product that kind of pulls it all together and answers the driving question. Okay, so as far as the showcase, so when they get to the end of the semester, we actually do a gallery walk. And so these are some pictures that one of my colleagues took. Thank God she took them, because I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to be weird. I want to be a mom. But I'm glad she did, because here we are. So my first semester doing this, I didn't really invite anyone. It was just a very intimate setting between me and my students. So you'll see the clothing, very casual. But these are the type of presentations that students put together. And so super visual. For when you look at some of these, you're like, man, that kind of looks like a poster session. That is by design. That is by design, because I know that when I was in the program, it only took one of my master teachers to invite me to the UTeach conference to be a part of her session and to put a poster together, that I was able to go down the path that I'm on right now. And so giving my students access to these experiences, we know that they're in this program to teach, but we really don't know their career goals. I literally asked this semester, like, what does everybody want to be when they grow up? And there are actually some curriculum writers in my classroom. There are future principals in my classroom. And so you, just like project-based instruction, you want to open them up to the possibilities of life, of careers. So this was, like, for many, their first opportunity presenting in this forum. So with these presentations, they answered the driving question. There was a big social exchange. They're giving feedback peer-to-peer. Here's some questions that I had. Here are some connections that I made. But then also discussing, how is this conceptual? What if students did this? What's your misconception? There was a lot of conversation. And then eventually I opened it up to educational professionals, and I kind of kept it within the program. So our faculty and staff, and I even invited our dean. And our dean now just so happens to be one of our founding co-directors. So it's always a treat when he comes in. So yeah, and so they're able to, like, be professional. They're not pretending. And that's because I set it up that way, that no, you are a professional. You are the future of education. I'm no longer the future. I'm just holding the door open. So for them to be in that space and to share their ideas and be creative, it's a really beautiful thing to see each semester. So when the pandemic hit, we still did our presentations. We used Padlet and Zoom. And if you're wondering, like, how do you get all of these presentations done? This is kind of the schedule that I had. I only have a 50-minute class 3 times a week. So we got all of those things in there. And of course, they're like, man, I wish we had more time. I wanted to see everybody's. And so I always make sure that there is a virtual place where they can go back and look at people's presentations. And so this is last semester, our gallery walk. And this was one of the first semesters where I heard my colleagues saying, oh, wow, they actually know what it means for something to be conceptual. So now I'm starting to see the payoff of all the work because it's trickling into other classes. And they're talking to other math teachers about it. So now it's showing up in my class.
Did you have any doubters or resistance, and how did you keep up your own energy in knowing that this is the way to go, but they couldn't quite see it yet?
Yes, my first 2 or 3 semesters, woo-wee. One, I went straight for project-based instruction. I said, okay, this is what we're doing. And people are like, I don't learn this way. So what I had to do is I had to heavily scaffold everything. So they're actually building their project, I would say during class, but a lot of the things that I had to teach, like scope and sequence, I made sure that there was a scaffolding assignment that they had to do in order for them to be able to get their product done. So I had checkpoint assignments. I slowed things down. The first week is getting them acclimated to how the course is going to go. So we do orientation, we introduce the driving question, I launch the project. So I take my time because that's what I did when I taught high school. You take your time so that they understand. And this may sound very silly, but college students need it as well. Adults need it as well. Just time to process and sink into it. And so when I started to slow things down and scaffold things and not feel rushed or that I have to get to all the math stuff, students started to trust the process. And that's one of our norms: trust the process, trust the people. So for me, I had to slow myself down. I had to keep up with the pace of my students. I can still challenge them, but they don't feel like I am driving them. Does that help, Yolanda? I know there's a part 2 to your question.
Oh, no, that was excellent. And it gives me a lot to think about. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
So having this extra practice with project-based instruction, it sounds like most of your students either take this class before or concurrently with project-based instruction. How has that influenced their project-based instruction class?
I think, well, there are some that take it with PBI. There are some. I don't get very many that have taken it after PBI. So for many, this is like, like, oh yeah. And I don't think very many know that our PBI instruction course is taught through PBI. So this is like a sneak peek for them, but they don't really see it as such because it's not super content heavy. We have a lot of discussions, a lot of, just a lot of talking about teaching with our topics. And then we do go through and do math demonstrations and we reflect and all that stuff like that. But they don't really know. So when they get to PBI and they're asking me, because I mentor them for their unit plans, they ask me like, I'm really struggling with this part. I'm able to be like, so remember in my class when I had y'all do this and then I did that? That was PBI. And they're like, oh. So I really just jog their memory. I really just jog it. All right, so I'm gonna trek forward. I know I have like 19 minutes left. And I want to make sure that at the end, I give y'all some time to ask more questions or to give me feedback on what you've heard. Okay. All righty. So I'm going to touch on very, very briefly because there's so much I could share. I want to share so much. on what the new curriculum looks like. So I have only 3 units. The first unit is 6 to 7 weeks long. That is me slowing down. So in this first unit, it's an introduction to conceptual learning and teaching, heavy emphasis on introduction. One of the misconceptions with taking college courses is, oh, I've learned everything that I needed to learn from this class, and now I can move on to something else. I tell my students up front, you're not getting everything that you feel like you need from this class. This is a good enough taste so that it's in your mouth and you can pursue it going forward. The next unit, because I want to include more math in here, and I also wanted to support conceptual learning, is concrete pictorial abstract. Okay, so it's the approach, not you have those multiple representations. So that takes about 2 to 4 weeks. And then we have unit 3, which is teaching conceptually with technology, which is 2 weeks. And I have an honorable mention, which is the problem-based learning unit. I originally had that in my first 2 semesters, but it was too much. It was too much because I wanted them to produce a mini PRBL experience. And they were like, I'm struggling with the engage. So I really had to slow things down. So as far as the first unit goes, these are some topics that we covered. So we spent some time answering the question, what does conceptual learning look like? And so over here, this is one of our activities that we used on Jamboard that they did after reading from that textbook that I told y'all about. And they differentiated between what does it look like for the teacher and what does it look like for the student. Okay, and then from there, we were able to produce our own definitions, our working definitions as a learning group. I touch on activity before content, so the ABC method. So basically, this emphasizes student prior knowledge, which is what all you teach in the 5E model is about, is giving students access to experiences before you start teaching them about the content. And the biggest emphasis here is students don't come to us as blank slates. So that's one thing. We also unpack the process teaks. So because I'm in Texas, I pull up the process teaks and I actually have full out workshops and lessons geared to them unpacking and truly understanding the process teaks. I don't know if y'all experience this, but when it comes time for them to put a process teak on their lesson plan, it's like that one. And they're not actually utilizing the standard and they don't see the value of the standard because we focus on content. We also talk about the mathematical proficiency strands. So that's these over here. And I actually have them make connections to the process standards. And so in Texas, and I'm pretty sure it's all across the board, but a lot of our process standards are written from these proficiencies. And so having students make those connections adds more value to the process standards. And then they become more careful about their selection. I also talk about procedural versus conceptual. We even touch on misconceptions and we talk about strategies for them to address them. Now with that, everybody wants to go the procedural route and tell students how to do things correctly. In this class, everything is conceptual. How can you address a misconception without being procedural? So do you need to ask questions where students can see the misconceptions for themselves? Do you need to use error analysis? Do you need to be sneaky where you're like, okay, that's what you think it is? You keep failing. I don't know why, but you said that that was the rule. Just finding ways to address these misconceptions so that students can address them for themselves and own that learning. In Unit 2, the concrete pictorial abstract approach, we talk about what is it not? And so we do Frere models for this after reading several articles. So if you're curious about what that is, There's concrete is the doing with your hands, pictorial is them drawing it as a picture, and then the abstract is where the formulas come in. And so it's really so cool. Like this fair, I have like several fair models that we do in class. It's like in small groups. It's so wonderful when they get to something like, what does it not look like? And they're like lecturing. My job is done because that's what they want to do in their lesson. So them recognizing it, and I don't even tell them. I give them the resources to read. They put this together. I didn't do anything. And it's just great. It's just great. We also touch on WikiSticks. I do a resource haul. For those of you that are up with the youth, with YouTube, they tend to do like hauls where they go purchase or gather products from a particular company and they try it out on camera. And then they do like some type of review. So I do something similar like that. And for the WikiSticks, we used the WikiSticks, but I pulled activities. And during class, I had them do different activities with the WikiSticks. This gives them more exposure to where you can use that resource. And then it also gives them opportunities to play with their math a little bit. Okay. And then, of course, we do a algebra tiles training. So I take them through these 3 areas, the basics, solving linear equations, and then factoring polynomials, which also includes multiplying polynomials. And when we get to this part of the semester, this is what they remember the most. But more of them use their algebra tiles in future lessons. So it's a good one to have. And then as far as Unit 3, I keep it short for a reason, because they already know about the technologies. They already know about Desmos, gizmos. And so I try to focus in on the criteria, because for some people, they'll get on Kahoot and say, oh, I use the technology to help my students learn conceptually. And you're like, but what did it do? It didn't enhance their learning. So I used this article by NCTM, which is the Strategic Use of Technology in Teaching and Learning Mathematics. This was their statement that they made. And it helps them see, what the criteria should be for selecting technology to support learning. I also do a very mini introduction to CDRs. These are this little baby right here. This the one that click, 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 click. It's so much fun. But Texas Instruments also has a lot of activities on their website, like have on full lesson plans. And so that is a resource that I'm able to give my students. And of course, I have them look up, go through there, find one resource. And everything about my class is up for grabs. And then they also are able to explore content-specific technologies. And that's just me giving them time to explore. And we just take the time to explore. And I say, what are some pros? What are some cons? What are your favorite finds? And that's a class period. And then they get to share with each other what they found. So there's a lot of them talking. I don't really do much talking in my class because all my words are in the content that I've prepared for them.
So I did have a question. Do you have a science version of this? Because I think this is awesome and your math students are definitely benefiting, but is there like the science equivalent, like conceptual biology or such?
We have conceptual science, but it hasn't been revamped like this. So no, unfortunately, I do not. But I'm happy to work with anybody. And I think because it's less about the content and more about the conceptual, it could easily be transferred. So final thoughts. Okay, two things. So the implementation, I want to talk about that really quick because that's super important to why my class is successful. And then I want to touch on student voice because that's one of the pieces that you probably didn't see. So as far as implementation, I make it a point to model effective teaching through student-centered, engaging conceptual learning experiences. So it's not me talking at them, they're experiencing it. So at the end of the day, they can say, oh, do you remember when Miss Leonard did this? Rather than, do you remember when Miss Leonard said that? I put it upon myself to focus on building and for us being a community of math teachers. So I tell them that the class is structured like professional development. So like, yes, we have to show up, I have to give y'all grades and all those things like that. But most of it is y'all developing yourselves. And really, I want them to talk to each other because I'm not always going to be here for them to talk to, but they'll always have each other in that community. And that's going to be really important when they go off into the field. So that's what I hope to build in my class. And then also I teach my students through Inception. Anybody familiar with that wonderful movie? Yes, yes, love the movie, love the movie. So for those that don't know, basically the characters are able to place thoughts and realities into someone's very active subconscious. And it's like they're in a dream. But that person doesn't know that there are changes happening to their subconscious. So for me, I have just become a fan of like unconscious and unaware learning, which is what the 5E model does for students. I want students to make connections and discover that they're making connections without them knowing. And so all in all, it makes me a sneaky teacher. And my students know that I'm being sneaky. So they're like, okay, you had us do this, but why are we really doing this? And then they're like, oh, I can see you wanted to expose, how misconceptions affect your lesson. Like, yes, that's what I want you to do. So yes, sneaky, it works. Okay, so last thing, promoting student voice. So these are the different areas of student voice in my curriculum. So daily discussions, we even use talking sticks. It's just a tool. So basically you get popsicle sticks and you give a certain number to students. So let's say we have 3. And when they're in discussions, you can actually tell who's talking and whose turn it is. So they hold up their talking stick, and when they're done, they place it in the middle. And I have talking sticks that are different colors, so they can identify who hasn't spoken. So it kind of creates some equity in there, but it also you can look and see like, hey, I haven't heard from you. What do you think? We also do peer feedback in different ways. Critical friends groups work. They share their reflections. I give them time to reflect, and they also share their reflections. We do have in-class work days on the project. That's their time. Really, they end up talking to each other and not talking to me. That's okay. I'm not hurt about it. But that's my time to see where they're at and for them to use me as a resource. We also develop class definitions and notes. So like the Frere model, from there, I take let's say I have 3 groups. We go through and we vote on the parts of each Frere model that we like, and I combine them together for the class notes. And so when they move on to other courses, they get to keep that bit of class notes of what we said it meant. And of course, I'm vetting it. But yes, we do a lot of developing. So really, they don't think I do much because I facilitate learning. I do instructional consultations where I'm just giving them guidance on their ideas. Unless they're really off track, I'm like, okay, so what do you want to do? What have you thought about this? But I'm not doing the lesson planning for them. There's a lot of choice in their project as far as the topic goes, as far as planning goes. And then the showcase, it's all about them. And that's what I tell people, like, oh, you did such a great job. No, I didn't. That was them. All I do is walk around and just sneak around a little bit. And I'm just so proud to just listen to these amazing ideas that they have. And so they start to actually feel like education professionals because they're talking to them. They start dressing up, they feel better. This is how I promote student voice in my course. Woo! Questions, comments? What can I clarify or extend for you?
Well, Lakeisha, I think you've done a nice job with your conceptual algebra course. However, I would like to know what's next. Considering you've made so many revisions, what are implications moving forward for this course?
For this course, I think that will come with time. As far as me identifying what are the other gaps. Because honestly, there are some gaps that have trickled down to other courses that I may not need to include in mine. So maybe we don't need to spend time on process teaks. And I can take that time back and put it somewhere else. So I have to see. It's not set in stone, but it's what's working right now. So I have to see.